Okay, so everyone, thank you for joining the ICN seminar sessions. My name is Clara Petrovic, and I will be your moderator today. And before we begin, I would like to introduce the project and today's lecturer. So the Identity Crisis Network is a research project connecting artistic practices and discourses that challenge established notions of identity and subjectivity. ICN for short, invites artists, curators, and theorists to explore new perspectives on these issues through seminars, conferences, and exchanges. And we aim to examine whether we can move beyond fixed identity categories and foster dialogue on the philosophical, institutional, and political landscape of art. So for this period, for the online seminars, we have invited Sylvia Sadzinski. She works at the intersection of contemporary art, curatorial practice, and queer feminist theory. Since 2019, she has been the artistic co-director of the feminist art space Alpha Nova and Galerie Futura in Berlin. Here she regularly conceives and curates solo and group exhibitions, as well as extensive discursive programs consisting of lectures, conversations, screenings, readings, residencies, and workshops, as well as community projects. She has held guest lectureships at various international art academies and universities on art, visual culture, and curatorial practice, and currently teaches at the Berlin University of Arts and the Node Center for Curatorial Studies. So today's lecture, titled Queer and Feminist Instituting, is dedicated to practices of queer and feminist instituting within artistic and curatorial approaches. It will explore specific practices that question heteronormative and binary settings and conventional artistic and curatorial processes. Queer and feminist curating challenges the museum and exhibition as normalizing entities, where meanings are created and binary and heteronormative structures are reinforced. How can queer and feminist art, as well as curatorial practices, exist in institutional frameworks? And how can we contribute to changing institutions in a queer and feminist way? So before we start the lecture, I would like to just say a couple of things logistically and technically speaking. The lecture will be about an hour. And during the lecture, I encourage you to put your questions in this Q&A bubble. And we will have a Q&A section at the end of the lecture for about a half an hour. Otherwise, any other comments that you have, you can also put them in the chat, but for questions, put them in the Q&A bubble. That's all. Sylvia, thank you so much for being here, and I'll let you go on with the lecture.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you everyone for inviting me first, and then also for joining. I just went through the list of participants, and I think there are some people I might know, even though I don't see your faces. So, which is a bit sad, but maybe later. So thank you so much. You already said a few words about me and about the lecture. I will just start to share my screen with you. And I hope, can you see my screen, the presentation?
Yes, we can see
Wonderful. So my lecture today, or my input, is kind of divided, and it's called Queer and Feminist Instituting. It is divided because I would say part of it might be a bit more theoretical or academical, which I think is important, so that we're all talking about the same things. And that we're kind of we're all more or less on the same page. And the second part will be maybe more a bit loose, not so academic, not so upfront. I will talk a bit more, but maybe upfront, but I will talk a bit more about my own curatorial practice and what it means to me to do queer and feminist instituting, practice queer and feminist instituting, or how this could look like. And even though this might be still kind of a big term, and but it's a trial and error, I would say. And as you said, I'm part of the curatorial, I'm co-director of a feminist art institution, of a feminist gallery, a non-commercial art space in Berlin, where I'm based, Alpha Nova Galerie Futura. I will also talk a bit about this institution that has been existing since 1986. So it's it's as old as I am, if this is out of interest. It is also like kind of funny because, yeah, the identity crisis network. So I was thinking it is about identities. And of course, I have at least like one so-called identity category in my title when we talk about queer and feminist instituting. But I think it makes sense to maybe define first what actually queer is. So queer and feminist instituting, the first term in this title is queer. But yeah, what is actually queer? And are we talking about the same thing when we use the term queer? So when we just search in the internet for the term queer, there's one definition that I included you here in this presentation. And the term queer itself is actually, or used to be, a word indicating something like someone as strange, as odd, as weird, as yeah, it's kind of like maybe normal, just like kind of somebody who is, or like a person here, an adjective meaning that something is odd. And yeah, I was already saying this, so it often was also indicated to describe people, and it was used as a swear word. And this kind of like came up in the 1990s, or it used to be the swear word. But and as you can see here, it was used to describe a person as homosexual, or like kind of, maybe let's better say not heterosexual, I would argue. And this term here, we can see as well, like queer can be a noun, as like kind of a queer person, a queer man, a queer woman, if they want to stick to this like binaries. But it can also be something, and this is like what I want to show you today. It is not necessarily a noun only. It is also like not necessarily an adjective, how we see here in the definition number 1. But queer can also be a verb, and queer as a verb is the kind of moment, and is the term how I use it in my practice, and how I also like understand the term queering, for example, like queering and instituting, and queering curating, and queering institutions. And when we talk about queerness, it is also important to define and maybe to differentiate about different ways of queer. So the definition that you see here is one, how we as a society, and by this I'm often talking about like a Eurocentric, Western-centric society, how we use this term in like everyday life, meaning in politics and in activism. So in politics and in activism, this term is often used as an umbrella term for LGBTQAI+ individuals. So for individuals who are not, due to their desires, due to their sexualities, but also due to their gender identities or to their physical features, are not like fitting to this heteronormative idea, and often corresponding to this heteronormative binary ideas. So when we use the term queer today in an everyday surrounding, so like in politics, in politics and in activism, we often use it synonymously to what we often call like maybe lesbian, bisexual people, and as like this umbrella term for the LGBTIAQA+ community, as I said before. But when we talk about queer from a theoretical perspective, this term can be understood way more open. So in queer theory, the term queer actually popped up and out in the 1990s. And it was a term, as you can see here. I really like this, this image, because you can see like kind of the more or less like 3 gravestones somehow that queer theory is questioning. So queer theory is a term that came up, as I said, in the US American academic world by Teresa de Laurentiis, an academic in the 1990s, who used this term. And actually, there are also like kind of some people who said it has been used way earlier. And in activism, this term has been used way earlier. So we know that the term queer was used by, especially by Latinx activists, by people of color, by trans people of color during the Stonewall riots, because like queer, as I said before, was a word that was often that people were facing as like an insult. So it was a very powerful but also a very violent term. And by like the mainstream society using this in order to describe people and also in order to hurt people often, there was this moment where queer was actually was like reclaimed. So and becoming like a self-identification, like a term to describe for like kind of self-identification. This is like happening with a lot of like words that like mainstream society puts on people, and so that they lose actually their very violent meaning. So this kind of like the Latinx and Black communities, the trans, especially trans communities, were at some point saying, so, okay, you as a mainstream society, you think we're so odd and so absurd and so weird and so different. Fair enough, we're just like gonna have this, and then we were like reclaiming this word and using it in a self-empowering way. So here, queer lost in this sense, in an activist and political stand, this very, very hurtful meaning. And now, jumping back to the theory, queer theory was based, and queer theory is based on those three assumptions that we see here engraved somehow in these gravestones, because we can say like, yeah, queer theory wants to put those very old Western assumptions back to where they belong to, somewhere else. So as we can see here, as we can read it, the three assumptions, like the first one that we can see on the left-hand side, is called sexuality is binary, straight or gay, and based on binary gender of attraction to men and women. So like one of the key assumptions that that queer theory works with is like the idea that sexuality is something very binary, that we are either this or either that we're either heterosexual or homosexual, and also here that there is two gender identities, that there's either like men or women. And another key assumption that queer theory is working with and questioning is the second one here. Sexual identity is an aspect of who we are that is fixed from birth and endures throughout our lives. So another key assumption that we can see in a lot of like Western societies, and I would like argue in most of the Western societies, is that we think that our desire is something very fixed and very something that is like kind of not due to change, that cannot change throughout our lives. And this is something that queer theory questions with a lot of like examples that you can also like maybe know from your own experiences, that yeah, sometimes our desires change, and also our gender identities can, of course, also, and like especially how we present our gender can change through our life. And the third one is people can be divided into normal and abnormal on the basis of their sexual attractions and practices. So this is also something that queer theory started from, that the question, why and how is it that there are certain ways of forms of desire, of attraction that societies label as not normal, as out of the norm. And those key assumptions, as I said, those are more or less the things that like queer theory works with, but also not only questions, but tries to blur, tries to disturb, and tries to diminish. Because there are, and there have always been societies and places, for example, where there have been individuals who changed their gender throughout the years. There have always been different forms of desire. And so queer theory really questions like, how are those norms produced? How are those like normalizations that we are surrounded with, especially based on our sexualities, our desires, and our identities? How are they, how are they impacting our lives, and how are they like surrounded? How are we kind of like surrounded by them? How do they become so normal that very often we even don't see them anymore? Because they're kind of like everywhere. There's like a classical example would be, there's like no term for you only say like you have a coming out when you're homosexual. So when you're kind of queer, when you're gay, there's like kind of I think like no straight person ever went to their parents and like at some point said like, hey, mom and dad, I have to tell you something, I'm heterosexual. So even with this, we can already see that there is like this norm. We have a term for like coming out. It is something that is still seen, even like kind of in very so-called like open or liberal societies. We're still like part of this like very heteronormative society. This is like how we would call it. And yeah, so this is like where queer theory comes from. And of course, I mean, I only have an hour for my input, and this is just like a tiny little definition that I'm trying to give you here. And of course, it like goes way further. But there's like 6 things that I tried to summarize here before we move on, just like kind of to have it in mind. So queer theory, as we can see here, sees queer as a verb and not something that we are. So of course, we sometimes use queer as to describe people, like the bunch of queers over there, or like people describing themselves as queer, as I said. But queer in queer theory is something that is also constantly changing, that is something that is fluid, and something that, yeah, can be more seen as a verb, as something that we actively do, trying, and this like actively doing, this queering is actually can be more or less be understood as moments of destabilizing this dominant concepts and discourses of everything that we seem and conceive as normal. And this like kind of normal, so queer theory, as I said, comes from dealing with gender identities and sexualities. But as I will show in this like lecture a bit further, when we think about queer instituting and queer curating and queer maybe queering those terms of the institution and the term like of curating, I'm very much thinking that, yeah, queer here can be seen as something more, that like the moment of sexuality and gender is the starting point, but in order kind of to see and to queer the normalizations and normalities, they're everywhere. So in general, we can see that and say that queer theory is actually breaking down binaries which oversimplify the world. And those binaries are often, and like, as I said, as a starting point, gender and sexual desire, but as we will see today, not only. Since like queer theory is actually questioning all the kind of forms of identity and the so-called fixed identity categories, and also like different forms of power relations, not only, but especially in regard to sex, gender, and desire. So I'm also very happy to, of course, like talk about all of this a bit later in the chat, or like, yeah, in the Q&A afterwards, since this can like be a bit complex, but I think it makes sense to, yeah, to just throw it out here at this point. So just like kind of maybe as a short summary, keep in mind that queer is something that we can understand as a theoretical idea that is actually questioning norms and normalizations and questioning hegemonical systems and hegemonies, as well as categorizations, and this like very binary way of thinking that Western societies has somehow perfectionized, it seems. And I have like included a quote by an artist that I very admire, Carrie Downey. This is like from a text. I can also like give you later on all the sources about queer arts education. And for me, this quote actually gives us a very nice work definition of how to understand queerness, how to understand queerness beyond like a pure way of being a synonym for our desires or our identities. So Carrie Downey says, queerness at its best lays bare the power structures that produce us and celebrates everyday aliveness over linear progress, uncertainty over certitude, our weirdness over normalization, self-expression over self-promotion, and community over individualism. So we have a lot of like aspects here that I think are very important, and especially for me and my definition of queer and feminist instituting are somehow like the base of my, let's maybe call it like work ethics, but also about practices that that I see in other artists and curators. And when we move on now with like the title Queer and Feminist Instituting, I think it also makes sense to define, at least shortly, what do I mean with feminist or with feminism. And there's of course like a lot of definitions about what can actually be seen as feminist, what is feminist, and the Merriam-Webster dictionary or encyclopedia says the very, very basic definition that I think we all could agree on is the following, that feminism is the belief that men and women should have equal rights and opportunities, and feminism is like an organized activity in support of women's rights and interests. So what we can see here, and like, yeah, my working definition with and of feminism is, I will like show you a bit later, way brighter and wider. And especially since the definition here is also like a very binary one. I mean, we're just talking about queer theory and about how queer theory is questioning those binaries. But when we see this definition, it's again about talking about men and women only, even though we know that non-binary people exist. We also know that intersex people exist. So our world is not so binary as queer theory actually shows us and has shown us, and real life also shows us. But yeah, this definition here is very binary. That's why I would like to point out that feminism is also not only like dealing with women's rights, but has, and especially in the later, in like different kind of feminisms, we're talking about different forms of feminisms, obviously, like the idea that I can like place behind my work is a very intersectional approach when it comes to feminism. And intersectionality, this is a term that has been coined in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw, like a theorist, an academic, and an activist. And here you can see maybe somehow like how we could define intersectionality, like an image that tries to define how intersectionality can be seen. So when we think about that, we as humans, as a subject, we have different forms of identities, and this whole project here, this identity crisis network, it's maybe about the crisis of identities. And yeah, I'm wondering, do we have a crisis of identities? But I mean, one of the crises may be that we're working a lot with identities. And as we can see here, all of those identities have their intersections. So there are moments where in our systems, in our bodies, in our lives, we're not only one thing. So I'm not only like, I identify as a female, so I'm not only like a woman, I'm also, I was born in Poland, as we were talking beforehand, but like I have the German nationality. So, you know, there's like kind of a lot of things that are coming here together. And so when we think about feminism, for me, it is important to actually see those different identity categories that are part of an intersectional understanding of our realities, but not only about our realities, but also about discriminatory structures, about like structures that exclude certain individuals due to their, for example, sexual orientation, due to their maybe physical appearance, but also due to their maybe impairments, due to their disabilities or abilities. So all of those identity categories that are sometimes something that we might feel, but others are like ascribed onto us from the outside as well. So all of those structure our lives, and all of those structure how we move through the world, how we're perceived. Some of them give us privileges, and other of them give us like a lot of disadvantages. Some of them are there to, so that we can find our peers, so that we can create togetherness, but other make it harder for individuals to find their groups, to be accepted in society, and also, make it sometimes like very frightening, and make them like kind of, face discrimination on different aspects in life. So, and now like, let's move on to the instituting. So I talked a bit about the queer, about the feminist, and now what is with the instituting? So what is actually instituting? Maybe we should first try to see and define what is an institution. And of course, there are like a bunch of different definitions of what an institution is. But since this is about queer and feminist instituting, I will just shortly use this definition that Nikki Sullivan and Craig Middleton provide in their book, Queering the Museum. I think it's from 2020. And here, Nikki Sullivan and Craig Middleton define the institution as not a noun, so not necessarily as something like a physical entity, but also as a verb, as something that we're all doing. Like for them, they're defining the museum as a verb, but I claim that we can also use this for different forms of institutions. So for them, the museum is a way of doing something that we all practice while being part of institutions, while creating institutions. And with this term, with this idea, and with this understanding of a museum or an institution becoming the verb, this also gives us a lot of power somehow. It like also gives us like kind of ways of thinking, how do we actually create institutions? And what Nikki Sullivan and Craig Middleton also do in this book is not only trying to find a definition what queering the museum and queering institutions might be, but also giving us here like the help of, oh no, I kind of lose my thought. So kind of seeing the museum as a verb, but and also kind of like with this coming, trying to help us to see all those norms that are there. So maybe you remember, queer theory is actually questioning normative structures and questioning all of those norms that we are surrounded by. So what Nikki Sullivan and Craig Middleton say that also museums and also practices of curating and all the other practices within institutions follow certain norms. And a lot of norms are we're not even aware of. When we, for example, do curate an exhibition, there's like the norm of hanging an image, an artwork on so-called outside, which is like also like a very weird idea, since it is like 145 centimeters high or 150 centimeters high. And this is a norm that has been established. It is also a norm that, of course, orientates on like people who might have their eyes at a height of 145 centimeters. So whom are we actually imagining when we're thinking about installing an artwork on this like kind of eye level? And this is just like a tiny little example how all of those invisible norms and normalizations we are surrounded by when we work in institutions, but also when we practice practices like curating within exhibitions. And maybe it makes also sense to then think about, yeah, what is actually an exhibition? And here I'm working and would like to introduce you to a definition by Beatrice von Bismarck in her most recent publication. I think is also from 2000. No, this is like from 2022. So from 2 years ago, the curatorial condition. And similar to Sullivan and to Craig Middleton, Beatrice von Bismarck defines the exhibition as a cultural product, as a way of doing. It is showing artworks, but it's also an artwork in itself. Since it is creating a narrative, it is participating in a public discourse, it's also shaping public discourses. And with this, it is an entity in its own. So as you can see here, I'm talking right now a lot about curating as an institutional practice, because this is like also what I'm doing. But we will also maybe have the possibility to talk a bit more in a wider sense about instituting when I move to my practice in some seconds. So here again, what is important for me is to think about when I teach at the university, for example, I always like kind of ask my students, what is an exhibition? How do you define an exhibition? And this question is it seems so banal, but in the end, it is actually like a very fruitful task to do. So yeah, you can also take like some minutes if you're working in curation. I think it is always like very helpful to like define what an exhibition is for you and what it does. Because when we try to find like this definition for ourselves, that is like, okay, it's showing things, it's working maybe with artifacts, it's working with people, it's working with artists, it creates a public, it has a public in mind, it creates a program, it has a topic, it is maybe creating a narrative. So all of those aspects that might come into your head and even more, you can see that there are certain, like while finding and searching for this definition, there is a way that like kind of shows where the norms and the normative ideas of what an exhibition not only is, but what it should be and how it should look like. This is also something that we have somehow in our understanding while trying to define it. So just like kind of to maybe summarize this at this point, curating or the exhibition is likewise to the understanding of Nikki Sullivan and Craig Middleton, also something that is done by someone. So it is also like a practical way of doing. It is something that is shaped by human beings, and with this has an impact, kind of shows like the things that were created in and with society and within society, but it's also something that like goes back into society and into discursive moments. Okay, and now, so I've talked about queer, I talked about feminism, I talked a bit about like the way of what is an institution, what is instituting, and let's move on to some of the examples. But before we do that, I will also like kind of give you three more examples of, queer and feminist instituting from a theoretical point of view. So as I said, this like kind of lecture tries to combine like two things, a bit of like a theoretical input that I know that I'm kind of like running through, and then like kind of some information or like kind of some case studies from my own practice. So in Curatorial Activism, a book from 2018, I think, from Maura Riley. Maura Riley defines curatorial activism as a way of curating that is a curatorial corrective. So it kind of corrects, and it corrects the status quo. It is a form of politics. This is like how she defines it. And can be a moment where we deliberately try to fill voids, to fill gaps, to give the space to, for example, artists that have often been for a long time overseen, that are not part of the so-called canon, whose ideas, like artists, like from this could either like be due to their identity, due to their geographies that have been for a long time ignored in the so-called Euro-American or like Western-centric art world. And this could also, of course, be the case when it comes to certain topics, to certain themes, certain questions that we deal with in group exhibitions, for example. So Maura Riley here, and for me, this goes hand in hand with the understanding of instituting as a practice. So it is like kind of something that we do, and we in creating our so-called ethics of curating, or ethics of working, or ethics of working together and creating an institution. This, of course, can help us to understand this as a political act, as something that that is based on certain understandings, and can be seen as, like, at least like as Riley does, as this like corrective of a society that has a lot of still has a lot of gaps and voids to fill. And when we now like kind of come to queer curating, so queer curating can actually be a way of this curatorial activism. This queer curating can be a way of working in a heterosexist, heteronormative system within institutions where queer identities, but also, and like here I mean like not necessarily queer identities from the LGBTIQA plus communities, but also kind of like way more, as I will show a bit later, where kind of queer curating can become a practice of thinking institutions otherwise. And I will just shortly touch upon this publication that we meet together with Chris E. Vargas, Dodji Hanja, Helena Recke, Jamila Prowse, Yo, and Vera Hofmann did in 2022. So we're like all practitioners, and we were inspired by the readings that I was just like kind of presenting you, and also we're thinking about our own curatorial practices and what are we actually longing for? What do we need in order kind of to, we call it instituting otherwise. So here again, in this text that I can share with you later on in the chat, and it is something that is you can read online. And it was a collective writing session where we collected a bunch of questions Some of them we're able to answer together and for ourselves, and some of them remain open. And as you can also like read in the introduction, in the editorial introduction of this text, we also invite you to send us your answers and to kind of like do this thinking with us. So how can we actually care for instituting otherwise? How can we see like moments of disruption as productive moments where moments of this curatorial activism are made played out? So here, this was like kind of like one of not maybe of the starting points, but to see like, okay, instituting otherwise. And some of the ideas that popped up for us from like a queer feminist perspective, when we think about institutions, were the moments of questioning ourselves, like, why are we doing the things that we are doing? Especially in like often very precarious fields of art where we work on the weekends, we work in the evenings, we work for not a lot of money. And so what are our motivations and what do we actually kind of need in order to create institutions and work methods so that they somehow align with our political ideas when it comes to queer feminist art, when it comes to queer feminist instituting. And so like kind of here in this text, we were thinking about like, yeah, time as an important aspect, for example, working together for a longer period of time, creating exhibitions and moments where we have the time to develop ideas together. And yeah, so this is just like kind of a tiny little that an invitation for you to also think with us and join us in this conversation. And now I will come back to this quote that I started this lecture with. So the quote by Carrie Downey, queerness, about queerness. And yeah, you can see here, so for me, this queerness has something to do with power structures, but also with like moments of celebration, with moments of with moments of self-expression and of community. And queer and feminist instituting, in my understanding, is very much based on those keywords, on celebration, on uncertainty, on weirdness, on self-expression, and on community. And this is something that I want to show you while with the following examples. I have still some minutes left. With some of the examples from my own curatorial practice that has been taking place in different institutions and with different people. And I will just like kind of, yeah, ride through this with you. One of those exhibitions I want to shortly talk about is a solo exhibition by the Vienna-based artist Juliska Stengele, and it was called Fat Femme Furious. And this was on you in the beginning of 2019, so it's like 5 years ago already. And it was on you in Berlin at the Galerie Futura, which is a municipal gallery here in Berlin. And you can see already here that in the title and in the exhibition text that it is a solo exhibition focusing on the confrontation between the body and the societal gaze. And the title already indicates what are the norms that Juliska Stengele is questioning here with I was kicked out.
Oh, okay.
Something happened. Yes, I don't know what happened. I think it's a connection issue. But you can. I think we were gone for like maybe 30 seconds, so I think we can continue.
Cool. When was the last thing? Like, have you seen like the slide about
It
the
was
last
just,
exhibition?
yes, just like a minute ago. Yes,
Wonderful.
yes,
Cool. Okay. So this is great.
almost
I
no
will then,
interruption.
okay. Um, just a second. I was just like sneaking into the questions. That's why like it took. Okay. So can you see the slide again?
Yes, that's the slide.
Wonderful. So this exhibition and why, this is like kind of the introduction text, the exhibition text, but I want to give you some visual material too. So this exhibition, as you might not be able to see here, but it dealt with the societal gaze. So with the gaze Juliska as an artist, but also as a person is facing. And some of the topics might be more might become more present here. So the exhibition deals also with a norm of the body and with ideas about fatness as an activist term. So when we talk about the term fat, for example, or fatness, similar to the term queer, and also like in the chat we were somebody asked about the term crip, similar to those terms that used to be very violent words and words used by non-queer communities, non-fat communities, and for example like non-crip communities in order to describe individuals and and like also hurt them with these terms. So here, like kind of the term fat is also within like the fat activist and fat activist movements starting from the 70s. This kind of term has also seen a very a reclaiming in their communities. So Juliska Stengele here doesn't necessarily deals with ideas about sexuality and desire, even though they're also part of it, and also about like questions about her gender identity. But one of the key aspects in this exhibition was actually the body norm and like kind of the ideas about so-called fatness and how like we're as societies as very fat phobic societies deal with bodies that are not like kind of part of the so-called like thin norm. And this exhibition, what it actually did, so you can see here now, like we were working together, and Juliska works with a different form, like very different media. So it was installation based, it's photography. Here there's like a cake that was activated during a performance, where this is like part of Juliska's body printed on this cake, and then at the opening she was cutting the cake and handing it to the public. And we can see here that this exhibition actually created a space. So there was a lot of, we had like, I think like 3 public programming moments where a lot of people, this is a spoiler, where a lot of like people from like the fat activism movement and from like so-called fat communities who deliberately and identify as fat joined here this municipal gallery that haven't like kind of beforehand very much dealt with this topic. So here again, it was not only about dealing with the topic, but also creating a public and working together. There was also like kind of some very, a lot of people felt, because we used this photography of Juliska that from the artist that you can see here with like wearing this pig mask. We used this for promotional, for the advertisement, so like as an exhibition poster and flyer. And this is like maybe something we can talk about later, but yeah, a lot of people felt like kind of very affected by this, and I received a lot of very angry emails with like regarding this artwork. So not everyone felt empowered through this exhibition, which is maybe like also something that we have to keep in mind when we talk about queer and feminist instituting, about or like kind of queer and feminist ways of working. So of course, also here, not everyone might identify with the term queer. Not everyone might identify with the term fat as we used it here. So this was a solo exhibition in a municipal gallery in Berlin, dealing with questions about queer beyond queer, as I would say. It was so queer, not necessarily dealing with gender identities or desires, forms of desire, but also other norms such as, body norms. And another exhibition that I was happy to work on and with was this one, Trial and Error, Transforming Health and Justice, in the Schwules Museum in Berlin, which can be translated to the Queer Museum or the Gay Museum. Actually, the Gay Museum, but yeah, this is like kind of the term, how they use it. At the end of 2019 and until 2020, this was a solo exhibition by an artist collective, Alex Giegold and Tom Karweis. And this exhibition at the Schwules Museum dealt with trans identities, and especially actually with the very brutal and violent healthcare system here in Germany when it comes to trans bodies. And Giegold and Weiss were creating two exhibition spaces, like two more or less immersive rooms and multimedia installations that you could enter from two different sides of the institution. And one of them you can see here. This is like kind of one of the entrance to the exhibition space. And both of the spaces, part of it, part of the artworks or half of the artworks were actually not on view when we had the opening. So also kind of like here thinking about what could it mean to institute otherwise in artistic or curatorial practices. So everything that you can see here, which is the other side of the room that you just saw on the other picture, everything that you can see here was actually part of the opening, or was kind of created together with the community, with the public on the day of the opening. You can see this is like on the left-hand side, there is a video by a sketch artist. And on the right-hand side, there's a projection of a person who was typing what they were hearing. And then like kind of on the very left side, those are the finished drawings of the court, of the person like kind of drawing in courts. And what was like kind of the background by this, like what can we actually see here? So the guests and the audience was invited to go to the toilet, go to the private bathroom of the institution, of the Schwules Museum, of the Gay Museum. And they were invited to look in a mirror and talk to a microphone, and nobody could see them. Only two people could hear you when you were in this cabin. One of them was the court sketch artist, and the other one was the person sitting and typing. And you were invited to look in the bathroom into a mirror and describe your genitals, but without using the common frames and the common things and wordings that the medical system has taught us. So you were invited to describe this as, and it was like kind of seen as an antidote, so as a kind of act against moments where especially trans people are often faced with the need to describe their bodies, with the need to explain their bodies, to explain their, describe the genitalia, something that like cis people never have to do. So here the public was invited to go to the bathroom and take some chocolate or a shot and describe and talk about their genitals. And you can see here, so this was all happening at the same time and parallelly while the audience was watching. And so someone was typing what they could hear, and the other person was actually sketching or drawing what the people told them that they could see. And this is how it looked like from the audience. And this is also how then step by step, together with the community and together with the audience, this artwork was created during the opening together, with the community and together with like kind of people that were all contributing to this like moment of togetherness. Here we can see Alex Giegold, one of the artists, hanging the finished drawing by the court sketch artist. And this is like how we can see it later on. So this is like now then after the opening event, where the left-hand side of this room was created, and we can still see the kind of table where the sketches were made, and people were also invited to do their own sketches, and the table where the person typing and protocolling the descriptions was sitting. And this is like the other part of the room. And I'm talking about this exhibition because I really think that not only because it is another, like the institution of the Schwules Museum, it has, it is like often also like criticized because it's still like a very, very wide institution. But what is happening here is that it's called museum, but they actually don't have, for example, like a chief or head curator or something. They're actually inviting, like everyone can apply to curate there. You can be a group, you can be a curator, you can be an artist, you can be a community group. So the idea of the institution is an institution by and for the communities, for the different communities that want to contribute something to the institution. And like this is like something that I thought was very much can be like kind of very much becomes very visible in the artistic practices of Giegold and Weiss here, like working with and for their like trans communities. Another kind of like the second part of the exhibition was this medical room somehow. It was a room indicating the horrible medical system where trans individuals are often not only excluded but face a lot of violence when it comes to their identities and when it comes to healthcare. So in this somehow medical, or this idea of like a medical room, in the middle of it was, as you can see here, a wrestling ring. On the very opening, you'd actually kind of see. So there were also books that happened with wrestling. Wrestling is always very scripted. Wrestling is always very scripted. So it is something that is more like a theater than like an actual fight. And Giegold and Weiss, Alex Giegold and Tomka Weiss were creating this this wrestling fight with different impersonifications of the medical system that trans people might face. So on the right-hand side, this like very hairy monster is the impersonification of stigma, for example. Then we have the medical examination on the like kind of in the middle, standing in the middle, or like next to stigma is transition, the kind of like moment people go through transition. Next to transition, standing is the medical examination, and next to the medical examination we see chlamydia, and then down there we see PrEP as the medication, and on the right-hand side, kneeing, we see HIV. So, and these impersonifications of medical indicators or of medical moments that queer identities and trans people in particular face, they kind of been like fighting against each other and with one another. So in this kind of wrestling court together with 20 liters of lube. And what we can see here is like, I think, another aspect of queering institutions, and it is like queer joy. It is like kind of the joy of working together and like the joy of creating institutions where art is something that brings communities together, where there are like moments of fun, of joy, and still like kind of where politics and togetherness go more questions that I want to share with you, like to give some joy. And I kind of like cannot remember who won, but maybe, or I'm sure this is like also not so important. I might, due to the time, I might skip this exhibition, even though, or maybe not. Let me just like kind of think. Maybe I can do five minutes longer or 10. Is it okay? Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so again, I take like 5 to 10 minutes longer, and then the Q&A is 20 minutes. Sorry. Okay. So another show that not necessarily was dealing with queer identities, but so we are thinking back to the quote by Carrie Downey that I brought with me with this non-linearity. So I think this is like something that we might see here. So I was talking about the moments of togetherness, about celebration, about queering beyond queer, so moments of disruption in the two like exhibitions I was just talking about. This one, Aliens Are Temporary, A Mutating Tale, was happening in, it was actually a group exhibition. It was a group exhibition in 2 venues in Berlin. This one is like the very, like a smaller one. And here, we were not necessarily dealing and thinking about queerness as such, but I would still argue that there were moments of otherness that we are dealing with. So aliens are temporary. The quote or the title was also inspired by another exhibition title of an exhibition happening in Berlin some years ago. What is queer today might not be queer tomorrow. So here again, like what we see as queer, well, as odd, as strange, as the other, is something that is always related to the time and the geographies, the position, the state, place in. So it's a constant change. And that's why it is also something that is so hard to define. And I think this is also the power of queerness, that of the concept of queer, that it's actually, we cannot define it. So we have to kind of be, it is fluid. So, and this is like kind of how we have to be while working with it. And I think also to be like kind of fluid and to be in the move and to be flexible, especially, is something that while working in institutions, creating institutions, instituting is something that is very important. So Aliens Are Temporary was an invitation, as you can see here, to think about plural worlds by encountering multiple states of being and sentience constellation of matter. So it was like kind of about the otherness in things. And the exhibition itself was mutating, it was changing. So we started in one municipal gallery of 400 square meters, where there was barely any artworks. So the exhibition itself had like kind of different stages where new artworks, where like the exhibition was like kind of growing, where the exhibition somehow became, I wouldn't say stranger, but fuller. So like kind of maybe it felt like kind of strange. It was a lot about like this feelings of the affects that were kind of created. And this is also how we chose the artwork. So this like kind of feeling of oddness, of strangeness that you can like maybe describe as a queer scent, as a queer emotion, as a queer affect. Those are the things we were playing with here. This is an artwork by Veronika Lehner, and this is a video work by Meld, by a collective Lauren Britton and Isper. that was dealing with also like kind of with this moment of oh my God, now I'm just like kind of like with transformational, the moment of transformation, and also like moments of cripping. So here again, and like we were thinking about water as well. So I'm just like kind of like giving you, due to the time, a tiny little glimpse of the exhibition. And of course, I cannot like talk about the artworks in more detail, but here again, like kind of this artwork by Sally von Rosen, it changed over time. It got like kind of darker, it got heavier. There were like a lot of artworks also like in the other show that were changing with and due to the time. This is a video work by Club Ate from Australia. And so in general, what I also think that when we think about or talk about queer curating and feminist curating, or creating spaces and queer and feminist instituting, this is a quote that I really like, and I always have in my head. So Cesar Cruz, an activist from the United States, says art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And I also think that, yeah, institutions can do the same. While doing institutions and while instituting, especially from a queer and feminist way, we can try to comfort the disturbed, those of us and those in society, in our society, that are often disturbed since, yeah, they face exclusion, they face violence, and maybe it is time to comfort them in our instituting. And this could be like a super wonderful last sentence. And it's like a pity, because I think it has to be like my last sentence, because normally I, of course, like would have also talked a bit about the work of Alpha Nova Galerie Futura that I'm also part of as a co-director, and how we understand feminist instituting. But maybe we can also talk about this in the chat, or like kind of in the Q&A session a bit more. So I will just give you a tiny little glimpse of some visual material, and I will finish with another quote by José Esteban Muñoz that is often, very, very often used when we talk about queerness, and reads as follows: "Queerness is not yet here. Queerness is an ideality. Put another way, we are not yet queer. We may never touch queerness, but we can feel it as the warm illumination of a horizon imbued with potentiality." And yeah, so I also understand that like feminist and queer instituting is something that is helping us to maybe envision like a utopian idea of a way of being and working together. But I'm very happy to talk about this with all of you now. So thank you so much, and sorry for taking some extra time.
No problem. Thank you so much, Sylvia. It was really interesting. I think everyone enjoyed it. And we do have some questions in the Q&A. I think maybe we can start with those. And then maybe see if someone has, someone raises a hand or wants to ask a question live. This is also possible, of course, to have a short discussion. So maybe start with the one that has the most upvotes. It's from an anonymous attendee.
Okay, wait, now I see it.
Yes. So I'm often suspicious of queering institutions, because it often happens that labels such as queer or feminist are used and co-opted by the power structures so that they appear more woke or PC, when in fact they are not. Do you notice that? Have an idea how to address that? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I totally see that, since it can be seen like as this like buzzword, right? Of like kind of queering and feminist, that, yeah, like kind of how does it, when does it like maybe lose its meaning? I mean, like maybe I think it depends, like kind of what does it mean to like, yeah, be more woke or more PC. It's often like kind of when it's like an institution just like kind of buying those, I don't know, having this one exhibition of like a certain topic, I would say like it can often be seen as, yeah, more or less like tokenizing, and then like, you know, like checking a box that like, okay, now we have to do this one exhibition about feminist issues, or now we have to do this one exhibition about, I don't know, looking at our maybe collection from a queer perspective, or we have to include this queer artist. And I mean, I don't know how to address it. Like kind of for me, or like how I address it is that it often also comes with, as I said before, like more or less like also like a work ethic. I've been working with people who did feminist exhibitions, but the way how they acted was like neither like kind of from a solidarity way, was neither caring, was neither like kind of a way of, I don't know, communicating respectfully, sharing knowledge. I mean, I think like for here, like for this, for me at least, it's important to define, yeah, what do we understand from queering, or what do we understand by a feminist, like working together as a feminist. And for me, this comes together with like, yeah, not gatekeeping, sharing knowledge, enhancing each other, caring for each other, taking the time to, I don't know. And some, of course, like capitalism sometimes doesn't allow those things. And yeah, this is like kind of an ideal world. But for me, you know, like kind of when we think about also Alpha Nova Galerie Futura, the space I'm working at, and where we actually think about like, what does it mean to work in a feminist way? So from us, it's not about like what we show, but also like how we work together. How do we work as a team? How do we communicate? Yeah. So I think it is like really not only about like what is shown, but also how it is shown.
Okay, so we have another question. How would you define or question your role as a curator in your projects when it comes to queering institutions?
Wait, where's that?
Agnes asks.
Ah, yeah. Oh, did you find the question? Yeah. I think this is often something that I think actually the role as a curator is also maybe blurred when it comes to working closely with artists, especially when it is working with for solo exhibitions. And I mean, maybe as a curator, it is when you do group exhibitions, you have more of the role of somebody organizing, putting things together. But for the project that I introduced you to at the beginning, for example, this by Giegold and Weiss at the Schwules Museum, and also Juliska Stengele at the Galerie im Turm. Actually, as a curator, I was like more in maybe in the background, or like kind of like more as a facilitator, and also like kind of in this moment as a friend, as somebody who's who's like kind of there to talk things through, to kind of like create ideas together. So I really think that this, also like this binaries about what is actually, I mean, we're working in the art world as well with like so many binaries when it comes to the organizational, institutional stuff. So who's the artist, who's the curator, of course, like what is like the exhibition, what is the framing program, and what is like curating, and what is like maybe education, or what is like mediation, art mediation. I think that those things actually are often very, very combined. And still, when we work, they might be like kind of combined, but when it comes to the official naming, and of course the payment, and this like kind of infrastructures, they're not like kind of so blurred.
Maybe I want to kind of add on to what you were saying, because you're talking about Juliska Stengele's exhibition. I mean, you mentioned her photograph with a pig mask. I was just wondering about the negative feedback you said that you got. Who was it? Who did it come from?
Again,
and what did you deduce from it? Yes, the critique. And what did you kind of deduce from it? Like, what did you do with the feedback and the critique?
Yeah, so I mean, the critique, there was like a lot of different critique, and from different communities. So it was by people who are not from, like kind of who are from the community, or like kind of, and felt like still very hurt by that. And others from people that were clearly not part of the communities, that apparently had the need to express their disgust with like emojis, for example, and emails. So, I mean, what we did with that was like kind of for the communities, explaining that this is the artist, it's like herself, and this is like kind of Juliska who chose to actually pose in with this mask, because this is like kind of, this is like just, yeah, this is like kind of things that she has faced for a long time. People calling her like a fat pig. And so she was just like kind of like giving back this kind of like gaze and reclaiming somehow this very like hurtful notion and hurtful saying. So yeah, what we did is like then explaining that this is the artist and this is like kind of, this is also the reason. But of course, like, yeah, explaining an artwork, I don't know. But like going into dialogue, which of course, when there's, I don't know, vomiting emojis is like kind of like something that like maybe, yeah, for me, this is like not a dialogue. So I was not engaging
Yes,
very much.
of course. No, there is no discussion really.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question that we have is regarding Galerie Futura and Alpha Nova, where you work, have been active since 1986. So how do you observe shifts in feminist and queer theory and practice within its operations over the years?
Yeah, so I mean, the gallery itself was in the beginning not necessarily, it was a place for, this was their own definition, a place for female artists. And with the shift that like kind of came with a generational shift that I was not part of in 2012, so I've been there since 2019. But like since 2012, there was like not only focusing on this visibility, the pure visibility and representation of female artists in a still very hetero and male-dominated art world. So with 2012, they came also like this shift of working kind of like with feminist topics. So it was like more like a discursive change. And what we can see is obviously like kind of the shifts in feminist and queer theory is that we talk about feminisms, that intersectionality plays a role in like the program, and also like in the questions how we deal with the space. So we also, since we're two white women, we also give other people the possibility to take over the space, to curate in the space. And we like we have the resource of space, so we're happy to share that as well. Like other shifts, of course, have been that it's not like a female or women only space anymore. So we define that we work with Flinter, so with like female, lesbian, inter, non-binary, trans, and asexual people. So we kind of like broaden the idea of what is feminist and queer theory. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, we should also go to the critical thing with like the 2 minutes lecture and the introduction.
Oh, the last one. Oh, there.
The two
I was
last
just reading the ones that have upvotes. Sorry.
yeah. I'm sorry.
Yes,
we can
I
also
think,
do
yeah,
the first
it's
the
a
up.
critique.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe we can come to them after we have one more that has
Yeah.
2 upvotes. So you will also explore crip theory in the context of art institutions. Could you tell more? What would tripping the institution would be?
I think
I guess
maybe it's
cripping.
Yeah.
Cripping the institution, probably.
Cripping the institution would also be interesting. But like, yeah. So there's like a text that I wrote in the queer exhibitions histories about like kind of cripping the institution. And so with crip theory, do we all know what crip theory is?
I can't speak for all of the attendees, maybe just
same. So yeah, I will not like kind of, I don't want it to be like kind of, so like kind of, yeah, as I said, like with crip theory also kind of evoked from queer theory, or is like kind of something that like kind of queer beyond queer, as we might call it. So with crip theory, it is the question of like when are like bodies seen as like kind of like dealing with ability and disabilities. And crip theory in the context of art institutions is something that, at least in the German-speaking world, has been coming up very like recently. So cripping or like cripping the institution when it comes to crip time, for example, like the definition of time as a non-normative counter idea where things not only kind of maybe take longer, but because this is like not necessarily crip time, but also working together with like shifts and ruptures and moments of slowness and then like kind of fastness as well. And this can like kind of be in how we work together, but also like, yeah, extending time, maybe having periods of like taking longer with projects. But this is like just like one tiny little aspect of maybe like how cripping the infrastructure of our work might look like. And when it comes to the institution or like kind of cripping institutions in general, this could also be, of course, not only about talking more about kind of crip issues, but changing institutions for, I don't know, like Linnea Meiners just had an exhibition at the Kunstraum Kreuzberg here in Berlin, where there was one space where you can just, during the exhibition, chill and relax. So it was like a space where you can take it slower, where like after all this input, when like kind of seeing and going through an art exhibition gives you the moment of, yeah, slowness and rest. So yeah, and of course, this is also something that there are like kind of so many other ways. It is also maybe about creating spaces where crip topics are actually valid and understood and take up space. It is about accessibility, right? It is about who is able to not only physically attend like these exhibitions, but or like institutions, but how are institutions engaging with an audience that might not be able in all aspects when it comes to, yeah, language, easy language, when it comes to sign language, when it comes to maybe the overstimulation by light, by sound in exhibition spaces. So yeah, I think those are just like kind of tiny little moments.
Yes, it's an interesting point of view, especially for the time aspect.
Yeah, I think like time is a very important very important factor of accessibility that we often forget, and that I think all of us could have more of, and like kind of like this, everything is like kind of so dense always, and then like exhibitions change so often, things change so often. So I think like cripping the infrastructure of time would be something that we can all benefit from.
Yes. Okay. And then we have, yes, the critique. And I think, I don't know if it's the same person, they're both anonymous, but it says, was this 20 minutes of defining necessary? And do you think this kind of defining is queer lecture? And then I feel like this is defining an introduction was prepared for a straight viewer.
So I mean, like with this question of was it necessarily, this is like a implying that like those people thinks it was not necessarily. I mean, which is fair enough.
That it's not necessary. Yes.
What is fair enough. I mean, like kind of for me, I think it is like necessarily actually, I mean, I thought apparently it's necessarily, this is like why I included it, because like I think it is necessarily in order to understand like kind of queer as something that is not only, at least like in my practice, that is not only dealing with this identity categories. This is like the topic of here, this identity categories of being, yeah, of a otherwise desire, of like a non-heteronormative desire, and of gender identities that goes beyond like those binaries. So this is like kind of why for me it is very important to define queer as something that can be so helpful when we think beyond those binaries of gender and sexuality. And this is like something actually I cannot talk enough about, since you know, like there is like, this is like kind of how it often is. We have like this definition of, or this word we're working with in our everyday life, but like kind of seeing is as a tool and seeing it more like kind of, yeah, as a practice, I think is, for me at least, like very helpful. Like maybe for that person, it's not. And the kind of defining a queer lecture, I was not queering the institution of the lecture, the infrastructure of the lecture. Unfortunately, this is not what was happening, but what could have happened, but did not.
Yes, I mean, I agree. I didn't think it was unnecessary, especially if you are talking about your own practice and actually framing it in maybe a term that does not necessarily mean the same to all of the attendees. So I think it absolutely makes sense.
But I mean, it's also okay to like kind of think that it doesn't make sense. And also, and then also like, you know, prepared for a straight viewer. I mean, only because like people might be queer, it doesn't mean that they dealt with like the concepts of queer theory. So I wouldn't, this is like kind of the same, you know, only because you're a woman, you're not a feminist. And this doesn't mean that you kind of, that you have dealt with feminist theories. And this is, I mean, I'm coming also from theory. So this is like kind of, I'm coming from practice and from theory. So this is like something that I try to combine here.
Yes. Okay, Michalina also has a question. So I'll let her speak.
Yes, thank you a lot. It was very interesting how you were talking about like queering as a practice and as a tool and as potentiality and something that it cannot be grasped and cannot be defined. And maybe that's why there was like those questions at the end, how you can define something that is undefined. But I'm also thinking because, and maybe this is something problematic that now queer became something like a fixed identity that somebody identifies as queer, and maybe this is something what is also bringing some conflicts when it comes to institutions and representing some groups. And how would you respond to that issue?
I mean, from a very personal view, I cannot, like, if someone defines themselves as queer and like makes it it is like kind of for some people in a fixed identity category, and this is also okay, you know. So this is like also what I think like I was trying to do. Like, it is not necessarily it's you don't need to see it as a fixed identity because the term in itself is not fixed. Like the etymology where it comes from is something that is not fixed, that is like always referring to the very moment we talk about. So for me, I don't know, for me, the concept of queer is something like contemporary. And this is also what this Jose Esteban Munoz quote in the end indicates. So the moment we define what contemporary is, it's actually like not contemporary anymore. At least like this is like what I would argue. So with queer, we could use it the same way. But this is now like me talking for like kind of queer as a theoretical, philosophical somehow idea and term. When we think about activism and politics, of course, queer is a solid identity category. It's just like, I think, I mean, this is how I sometimes work. You have like one word for different concepts, and you have one word that is used differently when it comes to like an everyday life, but as a school of thought maybe becomes something else. So, you know, I'm not like kind of, I would never argue against the use of queer as an identity category. It's just like kind of, for me, I think it is helpful to see it much wider, much brighter. I think this is at least helping me to kind of really look like about and like kind of on the things that we are doing together as communities and individuals as well.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more questions? Is there anything new? No, that's it. Oh, we've done it all.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's, I mean,
good.
Yeah, I think 7:30, it's perfect.
Wow, wonderful.
And thank you so much again, Sylvia. I thank you for answering the questions. And maybe I think you said you have some links to share. Maybe you can send them to us so we can send them in the email post-lecture. And
Cool.
yeah, thanks everyone for joining and everyone for staying. And have a really nice week.
Thank you so much for attending and for the questions and for the
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.